Hi, Jenny and Tristram. Thank you for joining me on this Speciality Food Talk series where we'll be discussing the war on food waste. So to start off with, if you could just introduce yourselves, give a bit of background to your experience in the sector, that would be great.
Shall I go first, or do you want to go? Awesome. So I'm Jenny Costa. I'm the founder and CEO of Rubies and the Rubble. I started Rubies in 2012 after researching food waste. Tristram being one of the first people that I ever, when Googling around food waste, heard about, and I actually remember getting in touch with him very early days, and he was always advising on and being a real support. But Rubies in the Rubble is a brand of delicious condiments made from fruit and veg that would otherwise be discarded. And the aim of the brand really was to raise awareness around this need to value food again and see it as a precious resource, but also to be a practical solution.
Great, thank you. Tristram.
So a bit like Jenny, I grew up very fortunate in the middle of the countryside. We grew a lot of our own food, and I had my own pigs, which I was breeding and collecting food waste from the local bakery, the greengrocer, the vegetable market, and indeed the kitchens from my school. And that's when I started to see just how much perfectly good food was being wasted. And I went to see the supermarkets. I had a look inside their bins. There was colossal amounts of perfectly good food being locked away and then trucked off to landfill. And I knew then, I was an environmentalist since very early age, and I knew that the environmental impact of food production was the single biggest way in which humans had an impact on nature, deforestation and water use and biodiversity loss and all of that. And it just struck me as totally irrational that we were chopping down the Amazon rainforest whilst throwing away so much food. I started to eat that food myself, and I got a lot of satisfaction, a lot of free food, I ate like a king for pretty much most of my adult life, just getting perfectly good food out of supermarket bins. And that really set me on a course to do two things: both draw attention to the huge and global scandal of food waste, but also to do it in a way that was appealing, that was delicious, nutritious, and fun. And I started to organize meals where we would feed people with food that would otherwise be wasted. And after I'd published my book, I scaled that idea up. And actually, Jenny got involved in the second ever Feeding the 5,000 event, where we fed 5,000 people with perfectly good food that was otherwise going to get wasted by the food industry. And that kicked off a global movement that basically took over my life. And Toast Ale was a continuation of that campaigning career that I developed. It was a way of turning a colossal problem, the waste of bread, into something fun, engaging, easy to interact with and understand. And, living by what essentially is my motto, which is, if you want to change the world, you've got to throw a better party than the people destroying it. And then that's how we'll build a movement. So that's what Toast Ale is.
Brilliant, thank you. And how have your initiatives been received by consumers and the wider industry?
I think it's an amazing time to be a business with a purpose. I think especially actually on the back of COVID, I think consumers have had their sort of feathers ruffled, and people are looking to buy into things. I think it's people are looking to buy into things that actually do more and do better. And I think there's a responsibility as a business, especially we live in a capitalist society, but as a business, that businesses should be adding and doing purpose for good. They should be caring for their communities and doing more than just producing a product. So, we to date have had fantastic response from our products, and I think from the consumer point of view, but also from our customers, from the Waitroses, from Sainsbury's, Marriott hotels, sort of people have loved. Your first and foremost got to be a good tasting product and stand on the shelf and live up to everything that a good brand should. But having something else that also the consumer can buy into, and that sort of gives gives them another reason for really loving and understanding what you do. And it's definitely helped us with getting onto shelves as well. I think from Waitrose, we won their sustainability award as a brand, and immediately then got a listing. And I think it's got a business sense to it, and also from a consumer point of view, I think it gives the consumer the ability to be able to make small changes that collectively we can have a big impact together.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Tristram?
So, like I said, the food system is the single biggest way in which humans are currently destroying the planet. It's the main cause of deforestation and species extinction. It's the single biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions. It's the main cause of soil erosion. It's really the source of many of the big global problems that we're facing. But the food system is also one of the biggest opportunities we have for undoing most of those problems. We already know how to do farming and food production in a way that creates habitat rather than destroys it, that replenishes aquifers rather than depleting them, that ultimately can pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it into soils where it belongs, where indeed it builds fertility and the ability to retain water. And I think people all over the world who are waking up to the scale of the ecological calamity that we are in the middle of want to be part of the transformation of the world's food system into that restoring, replenishing movement that we can really, indeed we must, urgently engage in. And companies that are delivering that kind of transformation offer people hope that all is not lost, that we still live on a beautiful green and blue planet. And if we can enjoy the plenty, the delicious abundance that this wonderful earth gives us without destroying it, without leaving our descendants on a much depleted planet, then why not? Let's go for it. And ultimately, you know, this will be good for us and good for the ecosystems and good for the economy. And yeah, for sure, businesses that are part of that are the trend, and they're the future. And dinosaurs who just extract value from nature and spew out cash and pollution, they must be wiped from the face of the planet.
What advice do you have for businesses, so producers and retailers as well, who want to boost their sustainability credentials?
I mean, I think for any business, it's about, so first of all, recognizing what you do as a business and what makes sense or where you can play, recognizing it and starting to sort of, I suppose, starting to put numbers towards what your impact is, so you're aware of what you do as a company, and then deciding on what that is. What is your purpose, and how are you going to start making change? And I believe that bringing along the consumer on that journey is essential. No company's perfect. Everyone's trying to do things in the right way, and I think unless you're very open towards allowing consumers to be part of that journey, you become part of the game of greenwashing, or it becoming an add-on, or it becoming a marketing piece that's just part of your company, or a CSR tick box. But really looking at your company and thinking, what is my supply chain? How am I producing things? How do I get it to the consumer? Who's eating my product? What is the end result of my product as well? Where does it go at the end of its life? And really seeing that as your whole responsibility, and embedding that purpose and your impact into the whole supply chain of your company, and then you can start seeing what you can do short term, medium term, and long term. And I think it's a business. I still believe that it's a business case in bringing the consumer along in that journey. And that sustainability has to be at the core of every business. We don't have time not to sort of keep it separate. I think what Tristram was saying earlier, I think it's from those early days and researching food waste, and actually spending time with Tristram and understanding a lot more about the impacts of food waste. I find it crazy that it's not something that people talk about. I don't know if it's just that it's unsexy or if it's hard to understand because it's compostable. But when you look at agriculture being the single largest contributor to greenhouse gases, and yet instead, sort of blindly, we're thinking of doubling our food supply by 2050 to feed the expected 9 billion, at the same time wasting a third of what we produce, and with food waste, just the waste of it, being the third, if it was a country, the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and America. I mean, all these facts I'm spouting from Tristram's book, everyone should read it, but it is something where you sort of, once you're aware of the impact of waste, and I think David Attenborough as well just recently sort of summed it up of like, what's the one thing that we could all do, and it's just don't waste. Sort of see things as we have got a precious world, we've got this wonderful resource, and we've just got to start looking after it better. And so I think the more we can be open on sharing that educating the consumer, being on that journey with everybody, and that it sits at the heart of everything that you do as a business. I think that would be my sort of advice as any business, to really to embed it into your business, your purpose, and live it.
Thank you. Tristram.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Jenny has just said. I think the time has come to move from the kind of having a few window dressing environmental initiatives to needing really to go back to the roots and rebuild with sustainability in mind on every decision. But I do also think I'm going to take it a step further and say that companies have another responsibility. They all operate within nation state governments. And at the moment, the single biggest block to solving the global food and indeed the global environmental problems that we face is that we don't have a sufficiently robust regulatory framework to tackle climate change, deforestation, all of these other major challenges. And one of the reasons for that is that nation states are competing with each other to attract business from the multinational corporations, and have a tendency, therefore, to introduce low tax regimes, low environmental barriers. We've seen this with the UK's break from Europe and the threat there to bringing in kind of America's lower standards on environment and health within the food system. And indeed, this is really the source of what I see as the tragedy of the commons, the reasons why the global community have not come together and made the right decisions to protect this planet, because we're all in competition with each other. What we need now is for businesses to take a progressive and proactive role in encouraging nation-state governments and international institutions to put in place a regulatory framework that stops the bad actors from acting in conflict with the interests of humanity and the health of the planet. It's all very well having a lot of eco companies, but if they remain marginal while the ecocidal companies continue to thrive, which they will do if you do not prevent them through law, then all we've done is have a nice party on the margins of the main trend, which is the ecological catastrophic trajectory that we're on at the moment. So companies need to support governments to bring in stronger environmental legislation, full stop.
Thank you. And Jenny, you've been working with government on the Step Up to the Plate initiative. How's that been received so far?
It's been, I mean, it's had there was a huge uptake. So it started last year, and it was sort of headed by Ben Elliott. And initially we had over 2/3 of food and drink companies UK-wide signing up to it. And the pledge was essentially to start being transparent about your food waste. So first of all, realizing how much and what are we wasting currently, and then with a challenge by 2030 that you halve your food waste, your food waste amounts. And so far, it had a huge uptake at the beginning, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of people actually being transparent and reporting those figures. But it's a great initiative, and I think the more companies can be encouraged by the support of everybody doing it, and it becoming a norm to start publicising what we're wasting, to start recording it, and to start celebrating any changes and things that we can do internally. And I think it's very hard because some businesses, depending on where you are in the supply chain, you can either push food waste up and down it, depending on how you measure it. And unless we're all actively working together to reduce food waste, and for it not to be something that is a sort of finger pointing, but we can all work together. I think if we're constantly finger pointing, any business is just going to start moving it into somebody else's problem. But it was I think it was a good start. I think that it needs a lot more though.
Yeah, food waste reporting is a really good example of exactly what I was talking about just now in terms of regulatory frameworks. Indeed, next month, after many years of campaigning, the organisation Feedback that I founded and has campaigned on food waste for many years, has been calling precisely for transparent food waste reporting from companies. We finally have a government consultation coming out next month on mandatory food waste reporting for large food businesses. And once you've introduced that, you've introduced a level playing field. Instead of having the progressive companies doing a little bit of voluntary reporting, we'll know across the board. And as Jenny and I both know now that we've kind of entered into the entrepreneurial space, if you want to know where to invest in the solution to a problem, the first thing you need to know is, where is that problem arising? Like we've heard so many figures about food waste, but unless I know where the large quantities of surplus bread that are being wasted are actually arising, it's very difficult for me to know where to go and put my investment. It's very difficult for governments to know where to put their policy emphasis if they don't know how much food is being wasted. And so that is a really clear example of where everyone will benefit if there is a level playing field, and the nation state government is the only institution able to impose that level playing field. And that is why on food waste reporting, a mandatory food waste reporting law would be a really progressive step.
And I think globally, they're definitely a progressive step. But I think in the UK or developed countries, when you think of the Western world, there's still so much that the individual can do in food waste. I think it's very easy for us to all look at retailers, look at government, and feel like you can talk about food waste a lot, but it's not something that you're doing. But until we all start seeing food as something precious and something that you're going to want to prevent from going to waste, you've got to start in your own kitchen. And I always say to friends, I think it's extraordinary, and it was something that I didn't even realize how much I was wasting until you really challenge yourself to be mindful of what you're consuming and how you're consuming it. But there's no need to ever really waste food. You can turn it into something else. You can preserve it. You can freeze it. You can give it away. And I think it's until people are realizing themselves that they are treating food as a precious resource, and internally, I think it starts with the consumer and from the government point of view. The government, you'll definitely get big mass movement, but in the UK, I think there's a lot that the consumer can do, and I think that attitude change will help drive other change within the supply chain as well. If the consumer is demanding a change in the way that we see food, and demanding the way that food is presented on shelf in supermarkets, and actually finding that a sort of a repulsion in food waste because they're so used to habits that have happened at home. Then I get excited by seeing that movement. And I think lockdown was a really awesome period for that, of people at home cooking a lot, having a bit more time, appreciating food, doing more with what they have, starting a recipe from what's in their fridge rather than going out and buying for a recipe, being much more creative, getting more confident in the kitchen as well. I think the more we can embed those kind of habits and that want in the way that we consume, the more you'll start reflecting it as you go out of your home and desire it from companies and businesses around you.
Interesting, thank you. And both of you on your websites, you state facts like how much food you've saved from landfill and things like that. What services do you use to kind of quantify the work that you've done? Is there any that you could recommend to the audience?
So we're at the moment in the process of a big project to start counting our carbon footprint as a company overall, from the manufacturers, from our transportation, our packaging, and we're on that journey at the moment. And we aim by 2021 that we can completely look at that, especially with our restaurant service. So restaurants, we have a refillable ceramic bottle, and we sell ketchup to them in a metal pump, so they can refill that bottle around 150 times. So we can start measuring that, and also then with our customers measure their impact by using Rubies and the Rubble. But currently the way that we're measuring our impact is simply by taking the kilos of fruit and veg that go into one of our products, and looking at the carbon footprint of growing that fruit and veg, and having that as our offset. And the WWF actually has a great online. It was where we started, and then we started getting in touch with them directly. But they have a fantastic service online where you can look at the carbon footprint of different types of food, depending if they're grown in the UK, grown in Europe, and you can start looking at what really the footprint of certain food products are.
So one of my co-founders, and indeed the COO of Toast Ale, Louise Zian, is a forensic accountant with 5 years of experience of carbon footprinting at the Carbon Trust, and very, very qualified person to do that. So we have a huge amount of in-house expertise, and supported, of course, by my own lifelong engagement as environmental campaigner. That said, we did get some support, and it is something that certainly London companies would be well advised to go to, which is Advanced London, which is part of the London Waste and Recycling Board. There is a lot of support there that can be got, and definitely a really great resource. But I want to add something on, which is, of course, it's absolutely vital for a company such as ours to do the number crunching about what the carbon footprint of our particular products are. But there are two things that I think all food businesses in particular need to be mindful of. Number one, land. Land is the single biggest, most important asset, both environmentally and in all other ways that humans have. And the amount of land you use to grow food is ultimately what is at the root of the biggest environmental problems going on. Deforestation is happening to grow the agricultural frontier, to increase the amount of food under production. Anything you can do as a company to reduce the amount of land that your product requires. In the case of me and Jenny, we do that by using stuff that would otherwise be wasted. The single, by far the biggest environmental benefit of Rubies in the Rubble and Toast Ale is that we're not using additional land. We're using stuff that's already been grown that isn't going to get used. And it's that saving of the land, the demand on land, that is by far the biggest, because indirectly what we're doing is reducing the demand for deforestation on a global scale. And the more we can do that, both as individuals, by not wasting food, as companies, by using food that would otherwise be wasted and not wasting it ourselves, or through other efficiency measures, that is the single biggest thing you can do. And if you start including the carbon saved by not deforesting the Amazon rainforest because you're not demanding the land, then your carbon savings go absolutely off the scale and go way beyond what the number crunching about carbon dioxide emissions from bottle production or aluminium can production or whatever. It's the biggest thing, and it dwarfs everything else by a very, very wide margin. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say is that companies like ours are not just doing what we do within our own business. We are catalytic. So in the case of Toast Ale, we put the whole idea of using bread that would otherwise be wasted, which is an ancient idea, not something we came up with ourselves. Indeed, the Brussels Beer Project showed us how to do it. But Toast Ale put it on the global stage, and we open sourced our recipe precisely to have an impact on all the other beer companies that can use this technology everywhere in the world. It's been downloaded 80,000 times. There are 50 to 100 brewers now doing it on a continuous basis, both from micro brewers who are doing like us exclusively brewing using bread that would otherwise be wasted, and now some of the biggest brewers in the world are adopting the use of bread that would otherwise be wasted, because it makes ecological and economic sense to do that, and we can get consumers to do it. So our carbon impact, if you take into account our catalytic effect on the food industry, is very, very deeply negative. We're saving carbon massively by transforming an entire industry, and I think companies like ours have that kind of ambition as that's what we're trying to do here. We're not just trying to build businesses that are successful and satisfy customers and make loads of money. We are trying to save the planet.
It's amazing work, thank you. So I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much, Jenny and Tristram, for taking part in this session. I think we can all agree that we all have a responsibility to play here. And I'm sure you guys will continue to be huge inspiration to the industry. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So